My ex-fiancé abandoned his daughter with me in Portland, Oregon, a week after we got engaged beside the Willamette. 2 years later, he came back in the June drizzle asking for her like nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway of my little duplex near Alberta Arts District and told him he was too late, that I had already placed her in foster care and had no idea where she was. The words left my mouth like a lock clicking shut. Back when it started, I was still arranging peonies in a chipped mason jar and practicing a new last name on napkins. My name is Evan Guyen, and I earn my rent-nudging pixels for clients who think a brighter button can fix a dull product. He was Jason Miller, 30, charming in the way unfinished men sometimes are, and the father of a 6-year-old named Maya who loved sorting crayons into Roigbiv and humming the end of songs. We'd lived together for 6 months. We had a June venue deposit down in the Pearl District. People don't put money on a future they don't plan to show up for, right? Jason said Seattle needed him for 3 days. Contract talk, quick in and out. Can you keep Maya? He asked like he was handing me a favorite sweater. I said yes because I loved that kid, and because saying yes felt like rehearsing the life we were building. I cooked her mac and cheese on low heat, the way she liked it, and lined the bowls in the freezer so they'd cool with that fogged glass look she found funny. I kept the living room lights soft and the music softer. The first night, when she flapped her hands to the rhythm of an ad jingle, I mirrored her, and she smiled the way sunrise happens. Slow at first, then all at once. I didn't know those 3 days would stretch like taffy until the shape of my life tore. I didn't know a letter waited under his side of the mattress, and I didn't know yet what a boundary costs when you were the only adult left in the room. All I knew was the house felt steadier with Maya in it, and emptier with every hour Jason didn't call. Day 1 without Jason felt like a late flight, annoying but fixable. I set out 2 mugs, one for coffee, one for hope, and refreshed my email between Maya's occupational therapy videos. She lined her crayons in perfect bands on the rug and asked, "Green next?" I said yes, because green is the color you choose when you still believe in arrivals. Day 2 was a loose thread. I tugged it by texting Jason. "How's Seattle?" The bubble never appeared. I called and got a cheerful carrier voice telling me to try again later. I cooked rice, over-rinsed it, and kept the living room quiet enough to hear the fridge hum. Maya wanted mac and cheese again. I stirred in extra milk the way she liked, watched the surface smooth out, and told myself I was smoothing out too. Day 3 made a noise I can't describe, something like a small crack inside a wall. I called Jason's parents in Denver, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I DM'd 2 of his friends in Austin, the ones who danced at our engagement party by the river. One message delivered, none seen. Somewhere between those tries, I realized my texts to Jason were switching from blue to green. I didn't need a manual to know what that meant. By day 4, I admitted I was searching. I paged through his desk drawer, a tangle of guitar picks, warranty cards, a broken capo. Nothing with an address, nothing with a Y. I checked the hallway closet, the garage shelving, even the box of cables every adult inherits. I found an old lanyard from a music festival in Colorado, and nothing else. Day 5, I emailed the company contact he'd given me in Seattle. HR responded within an hour, polite as a clinic waiting room. Jason Miller resigned last month. My stomach did the elevator drop thing even though I was standing still. I looked at Maya, cross-legged on the carpet, tapping a spoon against a bowl because she liked the hollow sound. "Green next?" she said. I nodded. Day 6, I called the Denver number again, then their landline. Nothing. I scrolled Jason's socials. Instagram gone, Facebook locked down, Twitter a ghost. The world is noisy until you need one specific voice. Then it goes silent in a very loud way. By day 7, the air in the house felt thinner. I told myself adults handle it. I did the laundry, I matched socks, and I understood I might already be standing in the after. On the 8th morning, I stopped pretending this was a mix-up and started inventorying my life like it could file itself back into order. I made a list on the back of an old Pearl District catering brochure. Call Denver again, ping Austin again, check bank notifications, scan email filters in case I'd trapped his messages. I did all of it. Everything came back blank, like the world had decided to collude with his silence. I walked through the house the way crime shows tell you not to, touching things. The hall closet still smelled faintly of his cedar spray. His guitar leaned against the office wall like a prop that forgot its scene. On his desk sat a jar of picks and a receipt for strings from a shop in Northeast Portland, dated weeks before our engagement by the Willamette. It wasn't evidence. It was camouflage. Jason's life had always looked like life. I stripped the bed to wash the sheets because clean fabric felt like control. When I lifted his side of the mattress, a dusty, sticky note stuck to my palm and tugged a folded paper free from the slats. My fingers knew his handwriting before my eyes did. The first line said our relationship was a mistake. The second said he'd been on and off with Rebecca for the entire 3 years I'd been practicing a joint future. The third said she'd proposed to him after we got engaged, and they'd decided to start over somewhere new. There was a paragraph about Maya I can quote, without feeling the floor tilt. He called his own daughter a burden, useless, too heavy for the life they wanted. He said I could adopt her or do whatever I thought was appropriate. He asked me not to look for them. He apologized to the air more than to me. A person imagines heartbreak as noise, plates shattering, doors slamming. Mine arrived as a click, like a lock seating. I sat on the bare bed frame and stared at the grain of the wood until the lines stopped moving. In the living room, Maya tapped a spoon against her bowl, counting out a rhythm she liked. She didn't know the song had changed. I folded the letter back into its creases and put it in a plain envelope. Grief could wait. A child could not. A child. I put the envelope away and opened my laptop to the page I didn't want to need, Oregon Child Protective Services. The form looked ordinary, checkboxes, blank fields, a box for narrative, like a mundane door that opens into a different life. I typed what happened. The work trip that wasn't, the blocked numbers, the resignation email from Seattle HR, the letter under the mattress. I wrote that I loved Maya. I also wrote the part I wanted to bite back, that love wasn't the same as capacity, not when the person who was supposed to stand beside me had vanished mid-sentence. A caseworker called that afternoon. Her voice had the practiced calm of people who step into other people's emergencies for a living. She asked about Maya's routines, her triggers, what helps her regulate, whether there were any sensory quirks to flag for a new environment. I told her about the way Maya loved the weight of a blanket fresh from the dryer, the bounce of a mini trampoline, the tight comfort of a soft sweater on loud days. I told her about color sorting and mac and cheese made on low heat until the surface went satin smooth. I told her I could keep her safe for now. I couldn't promise the next 10 years alone. CPS reached out to Jason's parents in Denver first. They let calls roll to voicemail for 2 days, then picked up with a weary insistence that this was temporary and someone else should handle it. The caseworker documented the conversation, and the door that had been barely open swung shut. Then she called Rebecca's parents in Boise, Idaho. They asked questions you only ask if you were already deciding to show up. What school support might be needed. Which providers to loop, whether Maya likes car rides or needs breaks. Whether routine changes could be layered instead of dropped. Paperwork stirred. I packed a small bag with the things that made the most difference in little moments. The soft sweater, the weighted blanket, the spoon she tapped to hear its hollow song, a Ziploc of crayons already arranged in Roigbiv. I labeled everything with masking tape like I was sending her to summer camp, not a different chapter. When the CPS SUV pulled to the curb, the caseworker knelt to Maya's height and matched her pace. My chest hurt with relief and loss at the same time, like two hands pulling in opposite directions. I stood on the porch steps as they drove away, fingers tucked under my elbows, and let the quiet spread through the house. Boundaries aren't warm, they're necessary. Sometimes the adult thing is the cold thing. The months after CPS stepped in felt like living inside a waiting room. Everything was beige, humming, and built for people who can sit with uncertainty. The case file moved through the system the way rain moves down Portland gutters, slow, inevitable, and not interested in my calendar. There were hearings I didn't attend and notices I read 3 times. The language was dry in the way only life-altering sentences can be. Abandonment, best interest, termination of parental rights. Somewhere in a courthouse I've never seen, a judge signed a line that took Jason Miller and Rebecca Hart out of the legal picture and drew Rebecca's parents in. The email arrived in April with an attached PDF and a subject line that felt too small for what it contained. I called Boise that night. Rebecca's mom cried into the phone in a way that sounded like someone releasing a held breath after months of keeping their shoulders up by their ears. She told me the plan. An IEP meeting at the new elementary school, speech therapy twice a week, an OT who had a waiting list but could squeeze Maya in for a Friday slot. They asked if Maya might do better with a visual schedule on the fridge, photos instead of words, Velcro instead of magnets. I told them yes, yes, yes. I mailed a box that wasn't big enough to be symbolic. The weighted blanket, the soft sweater, a spare set of headphones, the spoon she liked to tap, a packet of stickers she saved for good days. I pressed the envelope with the letter into a different box and taped it shut. Some things you keep to remember the line you won't let anyone cross again. We started a rhythm. 1 email a month, the occasional photo, Maya with the classroom bunny, Maya on a sensory swing, Maya holding up a green crayon like a tiny flag. She liked car rides if there was a rest stop halfway. She liked pancakes on Sundays. She slept better with a sound machine that made surf noises. People kept telling me I was strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a person who had done the next necessary thing and then the next, which looks like strength from far away. Up close, it's just a calendar with boxes checked and a house that echoes less each week. Life didn't snap back. It settled. I kept my lease near Alberta Arts and learned which stretches of any 30th are best for thinking walks. I started measuring days in small completions. Inbox to 0, dishes stacked to dry, a jog that ended exactly at the Laurelhurst duck pond. When the rain paused, I stood under a cedar that smelled like a clean slate and told myself that was progress. Boise emailed at a gentle cadence. Maya held the classroom bunny with 2 careful hands. Maya learned to ask for breaks using a laminated card. On Fridays, her OT turned weighted balls into a game. And on Mondays, she showed off a new sticker from a sheet we'd started months earlier. Sometimes I wrote back right away. Sometimes I waited a day so my replies didn't feel like holding on. My therapist, because of course there was one now, asked me to distinguish between vigilance and care. Vigilance is scanning every shadow for an old shape. Care is naming what's here and what's not. I wrote those words on a Post-it and stuck it to the edge of my monitor where I couldn't avoid them. In the fall of 2024, I said yes to 2 dates. The first told a story about a startup acquisition and waited for me to applaud at the right beats. The second asked how long I'd been single and did not know what to do with the truth. I paid for my own drinks and went home early both times. My friends said it's like physical therapy. You move the joint so it doesn't freeze. I nodded and told them I was stretching. At home, the box with the letter lived in the hall closet behind the spare towels. I touched it less. That felt like winning. I learned to cook for 1 without pretending I was practicing for 2. I rewatched a dumb show because the predictable punchlines let my nervous system unclench. When holidays came, I decorated the mantel with cedar garland and a string of warm lights. I mailed Maya a felt ornament shaped like a green crayon. Boise sent back a photo of her holding it to the tree, eyes intent, mouth soft. I cried the polite kind you can hide by turning to the sink. By early June 2025, Portland wore its gray like a favorite sweater. The morning the sky went from mist to drizzle, I brewed coffee, answered 2 clients' slacks, and felt almost ordinary, right up until someone knocked on my door. I opened the door to Portland's damp breath and found 2 ghosts pretending to be people. Jason stood a half step forward, rain catching on the edges of his haircut like punctuation. Rebecca hovered beside him, thinner than I remembered from the one photo he'd kept buried on his phone, eyes scraped raw. They started with the usual choreography. Sorry, we were stupid, we were scared, we're different now. Then came the thesis. They were ready to be parents. They wanted Maya back. They could write a check for any amount if I'd just help start the conversation with Rebecca's parents in Boise. Jason said, whatever it takes, like money, could conjure a missing spine. The part of me that used to shake didn't. It went cold and precise. I thought of a sticky note under a mattress and a sentence about a useless burden. I thought of an SUV pulling from a curb and a weighted blanket folded into a box with a spoon that made a hollow song. I kept the door braced with my foot and my voice even. I told them they were late by 2 years. I told them I had already placed Maya in foster care back then, that I didn't know where she was or how she was doing, and that if they were looking for their daughter, this was the wrong address. The lie fit like a key, because the truth had already been so thoroughly abused. Rebecca's face folded in on itself. Jason reached for the door jamb like it could hold him up. They asked again, softer, then louder, crying in the way that turns the body into an instrument. I didn't move. I didn't offer tissues. I let the rain finish their sentences. There are moments when you hear the boundary click into place, and it sounds like survival. I closed the door. Their voices blurred into weather. Inside, I leaned against the wood and waited for my breath to catch up. My hands didn't shake until I reached for my phone. I called Boise first and told Rebecca's parents what had happened on my porch. Then I called my own parents in San Jose, thinking foolishly that they would say, "You did what you had to do." Instead, I learned how quickly righteousness can turn into scolding. My mother answered on the second ring from San Jose, bright like she always is at the start of a call, and dimmer by the end. I told her what happened on my porch, that I'd told Jason and Rebecca I'd placed Maya in foster care 2 years ago and didn't know where she was now. I expected a pause for the weight of it. Instead, I got a sigh that sounded like a wooden spoon tapping the rim of a pot. "That was cruel, Eva," she said, and my father, on speaker somewhere in the kitchen, added, "Unnecessary." They said I could have been the bigger person, that I could have given them the truth and let them deal with the consequence of their own shame. They said compassion doesn't cost anything, as if I hadn't been paying compound interest on it for years. I tried to explain the arithmetic no one likes, that boundaries often look like meanness to people who benefited from your lack of them, that a single sentence can sometimes be the dam between chaos and a child's calm, that telling the truth to people who weaponize it isn't noble, it's naive. My mother clucked her tongue. My father said, "You're better than this," which is the kind of sentence that sounds like a compliment and lands like a judgment. I reminded them of the letter, of the phrase useless burden, of the months I spent building routines like scaffolding so a 6-year-old wouldn't fall through her days. I said lightly, because rage never persuades, that I wasn't required to offer soft landings to people who'd vanished midair. They said pain doesn't justify spite. I said this wasn't spite, it was a lock turning. The call ended without resolution. No slammed doors, just a quiet that moved in and unpacked. I set the phone on the counter and looked around my one bedroom like it could tell me if I'd become the villain in a story I didn't write. Here is what I knew, even with my parents. Disappointment pressing on my ribs. I didn't owe Jason and Rebecca a map to the life other people had built in their absence. I owed Maya my steadiness, owed her grandparents my discretion, and owed myself the promise that I would never again confuse politeness with safety. When my parents called me cruel, I rehearsed the story of how we got here, as if backstory could absolve a present tense. It won't, but I'll tell it anyway, because context is the only thing that keeps some memories from biting. Jason met Rebecca in college in Colorado. They were both 21, both convinced exceptionalism was a personality trait. She got pregnant senior year. Her parents didn't approve of Jason, no steady work history, a musician's attention span, more charm than follow-through. He admitted all of that to me later, back when confession felt like proof of growth. They stayed together through Maya's first birthday on a diet of odd jobs and bigger promises. Then Rebecca left. The part everyone skips is the year after. Jason hopping between sales gigs and side sets, naming every detour momentum. By the time he moved to Portland, the story he told about himself had clean edges. We met at a small art opening off NE 28th. Warm beer, pretty prints, people pretending they weren't refreshing their notifications. He asked about my work, I asked about his. He said he'd settled down. He said being a dad had changed him. He said I made him feel calm. If you listen closely, you can hear the sentence that's doing too much work. We dated for almost 3 years. He never hid that Rebecca existed, but he never let her take up more than a line or two. When I asked how co-parenting worked, he said, "Fine," in the clipped way people use when they don't want to follow up. He kept the custody logistics foggy and the present shiny, weekend breakfast with Maya, guitar on the porch, a future that looked like a shared calendar. I mistook his silence about Rebecca for closure instead of compartmentalization. By the time we got engaged by the Willamette, I knew how Maya liked her mac and cheese and which corner of the living room best fit a sensory swing. She was 6 when he left her with me. She'll be 8 now in Boise. I've known her since she was 3. long enough to understand that history only matters when someone intends to learn from it. Jason used his light camouflage. I used mine like an instruction manual for who not to be. 3 days after the porch scene, an email slid into my inbox from Boise with a forwarded thread attached. Rebecca had written to her parents. Subject line tidy, tone penitential. She asked for forgiveness. She asked for help finding her daughter. She said she was ready now, that she and Jason had changed, that families are supposed to be together. She used the kind of language people reach for when they want the ending to count more than the middle. Rebecca's parents didn't answer her. They sent the email to me instead, along with a single line that said they would not be responding at this time. They didn't owe Rebecca access to the child they had steadied for 2 years. They owed Maya routine, calm, and the security of adults who don't flinch when the hard parts arrive. I read the thread twice and then again, as if repetition might produce a different outcome or a clearer villain. But the truth has been clear since the sticky note under the mattress. A 6-year-old isn't something you set down and pick back up when your hands are free. The quiet labor of love leaves a paper trail adults never post. Appointment cards, school emails, sensory breaks timed between errands, a grocery list that remembers the only yogurt texture that doesn't make her gag. I remembered nights in my Portland living room when Maya cried into the weave of the couch, not the loud, theatrical kind, but the small, hot kind children do when the world won't make sense. I remembered running the dryer at 10 p.m. to warm her blanket because weight and heat helped her settle. I remembered how many words I didn't have. Rebecca's email used all the words. The math still didn't balance. People online love redemption arcs. I'm not against them. I'm against skipping chapters and calling that growth. Rebecca could heal and still not be safe for Maya. 2 truths can sit in the same room and not touch. I wrote back to Boise with thanks for the heads up and a promise to keep my porch light boring. Stability isn't cinematic, but it's what you build when you redone auditioning for other people. Changes. 2 days after the forwarded email, Boise called again, voices steady in that practiced grandparent way that carries weather reports and hard news the same. Rebecca had shown up uninvited. No text first, no appointment. Just her car nosed into the curb and her hand on their doorbell like persistence could be a personality. They didn't let her in. They told me she stood on the porch pleading, then insisting, switching keys mid-sentence the way people do when they think volume can negotiate consequence. I'm her mother, she said through the wood. I have rights. What she didn't say, because you can't, is that rights rot when you abandon them long enough. Inside, Maya was napping. Boise's living room has a window that pools afternoon light on the carpet, and if you've ever watched a child exhale into sleep in that kind of brightness, you know why silence is a sacrament. They kept the house quiet. They told Rebecca they would call the police if she didn't leave. She banged the heel of her hand once more on the door and then walked back down the steps, her shoulders pitched forward like a person carrying all her reasons at once. After they hung up, I stood at my own window in Portland and stared at the cedar across the street. Counting cones like that could sort my thoughts. I wanted anger to be simple. It never is. Even now, some small part of me wished for a version of Rebecca who could be safe, for a version of the world where that porch scene was reconciliation and not escalation. But wishes don't tuck children in. Boundaries do. I wrote Boise an email to document the incident, time, behavior, their response, and attached a brief note for their records in case they needed it later. Then I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and made dinner like an act of faith. Pasta water salted to the ocean, sauce simmered low, a plate set for one with enough attention for 2. After Rebecca left her parents' porch, the quiet didn't feel like relief so much as a held note. I kept catching myself listening for the next shoe. It is funny how your nervous system learns to scan, like a neighbor who keeps peeking through the blinds even when the street is empty. I tried to give their return a generous story. Maybe they'd been in therapy. Maybe they'd discovered a well of patience they didn't have at 21. Maybe they'd learned how to hold the hard parts without dropping them. Generosity is a kind of muscle. Mine was sore from overuse. When the generous stories wore thin, the other theories crowded in. Maybe they couldn't conceive again. Maybe a relative had dangled an inheritance shaped like a family photo. Maybe guilt had turned into a performance they were giving each other more than the child they abandoned. I don't get to know. That is both the mercy and the ache of boundaries. You don't investigate beyond the line you drew. The part people don't see is how much management comes after you say no. I tightened routine like laces before a long walk. I put the porch camera back online and set alerts to ignore everything but faces. I told the neighbors on either side to call me if anyone lingered at my door when I wasn't at home. I started parking under the streetlight again. I stood in the shower and pictured the line I'd drawn like tape across the threshold. You don't cross. You don't argue with tape. You respect the floor. At night when the house clicked and settled, I thought about the early months with Maya. The way she'd press her palms flat to the table when she needed the world to stop moving, the way weight and warmth taught her that her body was a place she could live. That's what we were protecting now. A body that trusts itself. A life that knows which sounds mean safe. There's a version of this story where I forgive early to prove I am the kind of person who does. I'm done auditioning for that role. Forgiveness isn't a door prize. It's a decision made in rooms where history has been accounted for. Until then, the tape stays where it is. 2 weeks after Rebecca banged on her parents' door, Jason showed up at mine alone. I saw him on the porch camera first, hands in pockets, shoulders rounded like he'd practiced looking smaller. I cracked the door but kept the chain on. I said, "You have 60 seconds before I call the police." He nodded like he'd rehearsed that line too. He started crying fast, the way some people do when they think tears can preface absolution. He said Rebecca had been diagnosed with cervical cancer months ago. He said karma had found them. He said they were trying to make it right and hoped I would help arrange one meeting, just 1 hour, for Rebecca to see Maya. "We're leaving soon," he added, as if departure were a favor. The word cancer didn't bounce off me. It landed, because I'm human. But landing isn't the same as persuading. I thought about all the ways illness can be true and still not undo the past. I thought about the letter under the mattress, and about a 6-year-old learning that a warm blanket can stand in for a parent who won OT. Grief deserves tenderness. So does a child's nervous system. If I had to choose, I already had. Jason tried a different door, appealing to my empathy for Rebecca's parents. He said they were good people, they are, and that I had influence. I don't, not like that. He wanted me to pass along the diagnosis, at least as a last favor. The word favor set my teeth on edge. Favors are what you ask of neighbors with jumper cables, not of the woman you abandoned along with your daughter. I told him to leave my property. He asked if I could at least confirm that Maya was safe. I said nothing. Silence is a kind of hinge. You choose which way the door swings. He wiped his face, said they'd be flying out within the week, and walked down the steps like a man measuring penance by footsteps. After he left, I stood in the kitchen with my palms flat on the cool counter and let the facts line up. If the diagnosis was true, compassion didn't require access. If it was a manipulation, silence kept everyone safer. In both scenarios, the boundary held. I texted Boise a neutral note, no dramatics, just information, and turned my phone face down. Boundaries are boring. That's the point. I called Boise that evening and relayed Jason's claim exactly once, without italics. Rebecca's parents listen like people who have learned to hold two things at the same time: compassion and a line. They didn't doubt that illness can reorder a life. They also didn't mistake urgency for entitlement. "Right now," her mother said, "our granddaughter's routine is the treatment we can actually give. Without medical records or a release to talk to a provider, they wouldn't respond. Maybe someday, with proof, with guardrails. Not now." After we hung up, I made tea and watched steam climb, pretending it was a kind of prayer. When my phone stayed quiet, the quiet felt like a choice instead of a punishment. My parents were still not speaking to me. I stopped composing arguments I'd never deliver and started noticing the ways my house held me up. The chair that fits my back. The lamp that throws a soft circle on the book. I actually finished the plant that forgives me for inconsistent watering. I told 2 close friends the whole story for the first time, beginning with the sticky note under the mattress and ending with the word cancer placed like a chess piece at my door. They didn't rush to solutions or redemption arcs. One brought soup. The other reset my porch camera sensitivity so headlights wouldn't ping my nerves every hour. Kindness is sometimes logistics. Work returned to its familiar demands: mock-ups, feedback, toggling hex codes until a product manager said, "Yes, that." I answered emails, walked to the duck pond, mailed Maya a green crayon sticker sheet because habits are anchors. At night, I touched the taped box in the hall closet and didn't open it. The boundary didn't need rehearsing anymore. It just needed keeping. If Rebecca is sick, I hope she heals. I also hope healing doesn't get confused with access. Those are different medicines for different patients. Here, on this porch and in that Boise living room, the prescription stayed the same. Stability daily, indefinitely. I don't know where Jason and Rebecca flew after the last knock, or whether their apologies hardened into anger once they lost an audience. I do know the house is quiet in a way that doesn't scare me anymore. The porch light is just a bulb, not a beacon. Boise sends a photo now and then. Maya on a swing, hair caught in midair, a green crayon in her fist like a small flag for a life that kept going. People want a grand ending, a courtroom speech or a miracle reunion. What I have is smaller and better. The boring heroics of staying put. A box in the closet I don't open. A routine that doesn't ask a child to pay for adult regret. A promise to myself that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're care shaped like a line. If Rebecca is ill, compassion wishes her healing. Compassion also knows it's not a key. We don't unlock doors just because someone cries on the threshold. We unlock them when the person on the other side has earned entry and the people inside will be safe. So this is the ending. A steady porch, a child whose world is held, grandparents who answer on the first ring, and me, choosing the same line tomorrow that I chose today. If you read this far, tell me what you think. Should I have told them the truth, or did I do the right thing to protect everyone's peace? Drop a comment and type 1 if you agree with my decision.